Brutal bikers surround a cop in disguise. Moments later, they regret everything. The city was as chaotic as it always was on a Friday afternoon. Cars honking, people rushing to and from work, and the distant hum of everyday life carrying through the streets. But down an alley off the main road, the air felt different. There was a tension brewing, thick and almost palpable. It wasn't obvious to the people walking by, but to those who knew how to read the signs, the energy in the alley was all wrong. A lone figure stood at the edge of the alley, leaning against the brick wall, blending in with the surrounding chaos. His back was straight, his posture confident, but there was something unusual about his presence. The leather jacket he wore was too tight, and his stance was just a little too perfect. He was playing the part well, but the eyes watching him closely could tell there was more to him than met the eye. This wasn't a typical biker. Beneath the helmet, a sharp, calculating gaze scanned the scene. His face was hidden, but the expression beneath the visor was clear. Determination. He was not just another guy looking to fit in. He was here for a reason. This man was a cop, a police officer in disguise, playing a dangerous game. The group of bikers had no idea what they were walking into. As the sound of revving motorcycles echoed down the street, the man straightened. He pulled his helmet over his head, adjusting it slightly. The bikers were getting closer. His mission was clear: infiltrate, observe, and gather evidence without blowing his cover. The gang he was up against was notorious for their illegal activities: drug smuggling, theft, and extortion. He'd been following their trail for weeks, hoping to find an opening, a weakness. This alley, this moment, was the opportunity he had been waiting for. The motorcycles roared louder, pulling into view, and the man's eyes narrowed. They were here. A gang of 5 bikers pulled up in a tight formation, their leather jackets adorned with patches and insignia that made their allegiance clear. They were known for their brutality, their merciless attitude toward anyone they deemed weaker than them. And this man, who had been blending into the shadows, was about to find out how far they were willing to go to maintain their power. The leader of the group, a massive man with tattoos covering his arms, swung his leg off his bike and looked directly at the cop in disguise. His eyes locked onto the man's, a challenge in his gaze. Well, the leader's voice boomed, a deep rumble that matched his size. What do we have here? Some newbie trying to play tough? The cop didn't respond immediately. He kept his gaze steady, allowing the tension to hang in the air for a beat longer than usual. His mind raced, calculating every possible outcome of this encounter. He had prepared for this. He knew the bikers were unpredictable, dangerous, but he had the upper hand. He was the one in control, not them. He took a deep breath and finally spoke, his voice cold but unyielding. "I'm just here to watch, not looking for trouble." The leader laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls of the alley. "You think you're just here to watch?" he said, stepping closer, his massive form blocking the sunlight. "This isn't a place for just watching. You're either with us, or you're against us. And from where I'm standing, you're looking like you're on the wrong side of things." The other bikers dismounted, surrounding the cop in disguise. Each one was a mirror of the leader, dressed in dark leather and helmets, all looking ready for a confrontation. There was no doubt they were sizing him up, trying to figure out if he was a threat, if he was someone worth challenging. The cop remained calm, his posture still relaxed, but his mind was alert. The more they surrounded him, the more they unknowingly fell into his trap. He wasn't just an outsider here, he was a predator, ready to strike. "You know," the cop said, his voice low but carrying an edge, "I don't think you want to do this. You're already on thin ice with the law. If you keep going down this road, it's only going to get worse for you." The bikers exchanged amused glances, and the leader took another step closer. "You're full of talk, huh? A little scared, maybe? What's your name, pretty boy?" The cop's expression remained unchanged. "I don't go by a name around here." The leader's grin widened, sensing weakness. "Yeah? Well, you're gonna have a name soon enough. And it's gonna be the name of someone who got their ass kicked by the Iron Wolves." The other bikers laughed at the leader's words, but the cop stood his ground, unwilling to back down. This was the moment, the calm before the storm. He had to make them believe they still held the power, that they were still in control. That was the only way he would have a chance to bring them down. Without warning, one of the bikers reached out, shoving the cop's shoulder roughly. The cop staggered back slightly, his helmet clattering against the wall as he steadied himself. His eyes never left the leader, though, even as the others closed in around him, shouting insults and mocking him. But it was all part of the plan. The bikers were falling into the trap he had set, underestimating him just as they had before. He wasn't just a man in a disguise. He was a cop, and he knew how to handle people like them. As they circled around him, mocking him, taunting him, they had no idea what was about to happen. The bikers were closing in now, their presence suffocating, like a storm ready to burst. The leader took one last step forward, towering over the disguised cop. His eyes were filled with mocking superiority, his fists clenched, and his body language screamed aggression. His gang stood around, egging him on, waiting for him to make the first move. "You're not tough enough to be one of us," the leader spat. "We run this town, and you're about to find out just how much. Get him, boys." With a nod from their leader, the bikers began to close in, slowly surrounding the cop in an intimidating circle. The street was silent except for the sound of heavy boots and the occasional revving of a motorcycle. The tension in the air was almost unbearable, but the cop's expression never faltered. He was still calm, as if the entire situation were under control. His mind was sharp, working through his plan. This was part of the strategy. Let them believe they had power. Let them think they were in control. One of the bikers stepped forward, throwing a punch aimed directly at the cop's stomach. The cop's eyes flashed as he sidestepped the blow with surprising speed. The biker missed, stumbling forward as he tried to regain his balance. In an instant, the cop grabbed him by the arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing the biker to the ground. The other bikers froze for a moment, shock spreading through the group. Their leader's smug grin slipped, replaced with disbelief. The cop's movements were too fast, too precise. This wasn't the reaction they had expected from someone they had pegged as an easy target. "What the hell?" one of the bikers muttered, taking a step back. The leader's voice broke the tension. "It's just one of them, boys. Don't let him get the upper hand." But the doubt had already crept in. The bikers were now unsure. This cop wasn't just any man off the street. He was trained, precise. The fear that had been buried deep inside them began to rise. They had underestimated him, and now they could feel the consequences of that mistake. The cop stepped back, releasing the biker he had subdued. The man scrambled to his feet, rubbing his arm, clearly stunned by the cop's strength. The others didn't move, their eyes now shifting nervously from the cop to each other. "You made a mistake," the cop said, his voice cold, almost clinical. "You think you can intimidate people just because you have numbers and motorcycles. But you don't control the streets. You never have." The leader's eyes narrowed, his face contorting with anger. He was used to being feared, used to people backing down the moment he raised his voice. This cop, this stranger in disguise, was turning the tables. The biker gang was not used to being questioned, not used to having their power challenged. "You're just one guy," the leader spat, trying to rally his gang. "We can take you down easy. We outnumber you." But the cop didn't even flinch. "You outnumber me," he said, stepping forward, "but you don't have what I have. And that's why you're going to lose." The bikers stood in silence. Their leader had gone from enraged to visibly shaken. The group was starting to fall apart. The power they had once held, based solely on fear and intimidation, was slipping from their grasp. One of the bikers, a tall, muscular man, stepped forward, his voice shaky. "Let's get out of here. This guy's trouble." But the leader wasn't ready to back down yet. He took a step closer to the cop, glaring. "You think you're some kind of hero, huh? You think you've won?" The cop remained calm. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who won't let you push people around anymore." The leader, now visibly rattled, clenched his fists in frustration. "You don't know who you're messing with," he growled. The cop's eyes hardened. "I know exactly who I'm messing with. And if you leave now, You might still have a chance to save whatever's left of your reputation. The bikers exchanged uneasy looks. For the first time, they weren't sure who was in charge. The balance of power had shifted, and they were the ones on the defensive. The leader looked around, his arrogance fading. The sound of the cop's steady breathing seemed to fill the space between them. The cop was in control now, and they all knew it. "You're lucky I don't want to deal with you right now," the leader muttered, his voice low. "But this isn't over. We'll be back." The cop didn't answer, his posture still unyielding. His eyes locked on the leader. He didn't need to say anything more. He had already won. Without another word, the leader turned, signaling his gang to follow. Slowly, they began to file out, their heavy footsteps echoing in the alley as they retreated. The cop stood still, watching them go. He didn't need to chase them. He knew they would be back. But they had learned something today. They had learned that not every fight was about size or numbers. Sometimes it was about control, about strength of will. As the sound of the motorcycles faded into the distance, the cop exhaled deeply. He was ready. He had faced them down, and they had regretted it. The battle was far from over, but this was just the beginning. The tension in the alley still hung heavy in the air as the cop watched the bikers retreat. He stood tall, not moving a muscle until the last of the bikes disappeared around the corner. He exhaled slowly, his pulse steady, but inside, he was already preparing for what was next. The bikers had been rattled, but he knew that would only fuel their anger. They would regroup, and when they did, they wouldn't back down so easily. But that was part of the plan. The idea wasn't just to fight them, it was to make them realize that there were consequences to their actions, to make them question their own power. The first encounter had been a message, but the real fight would come when they underestimated him again. The city was quieter now, the sounds of the street fading into the background as the cop removed his helmet and placed it on the ground beside him. His disguise was still intact, but for the moment he allowed himself to breathe. He was playing a dangerous game, but he was prepared for it. The next day came with a sense of unease, the kind that settled deep into the bones. The cop didn't have the luxury of time, and he knew the bikers wouldn't take long to regroup. It was only a matter of time before they came after him again. The morning passed in a blur of routine, but every time the door to the precinct opened, his senses heightened. He had to be ready. Around noon, he received word. Dispatch had a report of a disturbance near the same alley where the bikers had surrounded him the day before. It was a clear sign that they were coming back for round two. The cop's mind raced, but he kept his cool. This was his chance to end it. He suited up, his body moving with the precision of someone who had done this many times before. He had the uniform on beneath the disguise. He didn't need the helmet anymore. He was ready for whatever came next. The bikers would be expecting the same easy target. But this time, they were going to meet something they hadn't anticipated. The alley was quiet when he arrived, the sound of his boots tapping softly against the concrete as he moved forward. The street was still busy, but the area around him seemed unnaturally still. As he approached, he saw the familiar roar of motorcycles in the distance. Louder this time, faster. The bikers were back. The cop didn't wait for them to circle him this time. He was already on the move. His training had taught him to anticipate their every move, to read the subtle shifts in the group's dynamic. As the bikers pulled into view, the leader in front, the cop made his first move. He was faster than they expected, his hand gripping the side of the leader's bike in a quick, fluid motion, pulling him off the motorcycle and onto the ground in one seamless move. The gang was in disarray immediately. The leader scrambled to get back on his feet, but the cop was already in motion, his body a blur as he knocked another biker off his bike with a swift strike. The group tried to close in, but the cop was already taking control of the situation. He wasn't just fighting for himself now. He was fighting for everyone they had ever tormented. His mind was sharp, every motion calculated to de-escalate the violence while still asserting dominance. "Move again, and it's over," the cop said, his voice low but carrying an undeniable force. The bikers hesitated, looking between one another. The cocky bravado they had walked in with was quickly unraveling as the cop demonstrated his speed and precision. One of the bikers lunged, but before he could even make contact, the cop twisted his arm behind his back, slamming him into the wall. The sound of his body hitting the brick echoed through the alley, sending a shockwave of fear through the gang. The leader was on his feet now, his face red with rage. "You don't know who you're messing with?" he screamed, pulling a knife from his jacket. The cop didn't flinch. "I'm not afraid of knives," he said, his voice steady, even as the leader advanced. The cop sidestepped, his hand shooting out and grabbing the leader's wrist in a smooth motion, twisting it until the knife dropped to the ground. Before the leader could react, the cop had him pinned, his knee in the man's back, his arm twisted behind him. "You've had your chance," the cop said, his voice cold. "And now you're going to regret it." The bikers looked on in stunned silence, the fear creeping in. Their leader, the one who had always been the center of their power, was now on the ground, helpless. They had been outsmarted, outclassed by a man they had thought was just another weakling to push around. The cop stood, lifting the leader by his arm and shoving him toward his gang. "Get out," he said, "before I change my mind." The bikers didn't need to be told twice. One by one, they mounted their bikes, their engines roaring to life as they fled the scene, leaving the cops standing alone in the alley, victorious. The sound of the motorcycles faded into the distance, the engines gradually growing quieter as the bikers retreated. The cop stood in the alley, the adrenaline slowly fading from his veins. His heart was still pounding, but he remained composed, scanning the area for any lingering signs of danger. He knew the bikers were dangerous, but he had also proven to himself that he wasn't just another target to be bullied. He had won this round, but he also knew that the bikers wouldn't stay down forever. As the last of the motorcycles disappeared around the corner, the cop felt a sense of calm wash over him. But it wasn't long before that calm was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the alley. He turned, his hand instinctively resting on the holster at his side, but he relaxed as the vehicle came into view. It wasn't a biker gang. It was a plain, unmarked sedan. The car slowed as it approached, and the cop recognized the driver, a fellow officer, one he trusted deeply. The sedan came to a stop, and the passenger door opened. The officer stepped out, wearing plain clothes but still carrying himself with the same sense of authority. He nodded at the cop, his eyes scanning the alley. "You did it," the officer said, a slight smile on his face. "They're gone. You handled it." The cop nodded, still processing the encounter. "For now. But I don't think this is over yet. They'll regroup." His colleague stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've been tracking them for a while. You were right to be cautious. They've been moving drugs through the city, using the bikes to keep everything under the radar. It's not just about intimidation. They've got a whole operation." The cop's eyes narrowed. "I knew it, and now they know we're onto them. That's why they'll come back. But next time, I won't be waiting for them to make the first move." His colleague frowned, a look of concern crossing his face. "I've seen their kind before. They're ruthless, and they won't stop until they've gotten what they want. You've already shown them that they can't just push people around, but they're gonna want revenge." The cop was quiet for a moment, weighing the words carefully. He had expected this. He knew the stakes were high, and while he had gained the upper hand, it wasn't going to be enough to stop them for good. He needed more than just a fight. He needed leverage. "We'll be ready," the cop finally said, his voice firm. "But this isn't just about beating them. It's about getting to the heart of their operation and taking it down for good. I'm not just going to scare them off. I'm going to end this." His colleague looked at him for a long moment, then gave a reluctant nod. "I'll help you however I can, but you have to be careful. They don't take kindly to losing control." The cop turned his gaze back toward the alley, where the remnants of the biker's presence still lingered in the air. The sense of finality wasn't there, not yet. He wasn't going to let the gang walk away from this. Not after everything they had done. "I know," the cop replied quietly. "I know. But this time they've made a mistake. And they won't get away with it." Days passed and the cop kept his focus. He kept a low profile, tracking the bikers' movements and collecting information. He knew they were waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike back. But this time, he was one step ahead. He had the leverage he needed. With the support of his fellow officers, he gathered intel on the bikers' illegal dealings, slowly building the case that would bring them down once and for all. And then, one fateful night, it happened. The bikers returned, this time in full force. The cop had expected it, but he had also been prepared. He had anticipated every move, every attempt they might make to regain their lost power. He wasn't just waiting for them to show up. He was already in position, waiting to bring their reign of terror to an end. The same alley, the same group of bikers, but this time the atmosphere was different. The bikers rode in with purpose, their eyes fixed on the cop. They weren't just here for intimidation. They were here to finish what they had started. The leader, his face twisted with anger, dismounted his bike and walked toward the cop, his eyes narrowing. "You think you've won?" the leader growled. "You think this is over?" The cop didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his posture unwavering. "No, I don't think it's over. I know it's over." The leader's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but it was gone in an instant. He lunged at the cop, swinging with the same fury he had shown before. But this time, the cop was ready. He blocked the attack, his movements quick and precise, and in one smooth motion, he disarmed the leader, pushing him back. The other bikers moved in, but they were out of sync, disorganized. The cop was too fast, too controlled. One by one, they fell, each move calculated and deliberate. They had underestimated him, and this time, there was no chance for them to escape. The leader, now pinned to the ground, looked up at the cop with a mixture of fear and rage. "You won't get away with this," he spat, but the cop was unmoved. "I already have," he said, his voice cold and final. With a signal, his fellow officers arrived, securing the bikers and taking them into custody. The gang's operation was dismantled, their illegal dealings exposed. The cop had done it. He had turned the tables and brought the bikers to their knees. As the leader was led away in cuffs, the cops stood in the alley, watching the chaos unfold. It wasn't about the victory, it was about what came next. This was just the beginning of a long road to restoring order. And this time, the bikers wouldn't be coming back. The dust had barely settled when the last of the bikers was led away, their hands cuffed behind their backs. The city street was eerily quiet now, no longer filled with the roar of engines or the tension that had once gripped the alley. The cop stood at the edge of the scene, watching as his fellow officers did their job, securing the bikes, gathering evidence, and taking the gang into custody. It was over. The bikers, who had once terrorized the streets, had been dismantled, each one arrested, their illegal activities exposed, their power shattered. The cops' plan had worked. The gang was taken down, and the city could finally breathe again. But for the cop, the feeling of victory wasn't as sweet as it might have seemed. He had spent so much time in the role of the underdog, so many hours preparing for this moment, that now, with the bikers in custody, he found himself standing in the quiet aftermath, reflecting on what had just transpired. He had done his job. He had played his part in bringing down a dangerous gang. But in the end, it wasn't the bikers who had changed. It was him. He had become someone different throughout this ordeal. Someone who had faced fear, intimidation, and uncertainty, and had come out on the other side stronger. The experience had shown him just how far he was willing to go to make things right. As his partner approached, breaking him out of his thoughts, the cop's face remained stoic, though his mind was still processing everything that had happened. His partner clapped him on the back, a smile on his face. "Good work, man. You really pulled it off." The cop nodded, still watching the bikers being loaded into the police vehicles. "It wasn't just me. We all did this together." But deep down, the cop knew this had been his fight. He had set the plan in motion. He had been the one to face down the gang and take them on when everyone else had been too afraid. It wasn't about the recognition. It was about knowing that he had done what was necessary to protect the city, to keep people safe. His partner looked over at him, sensing the exhaustion in his posture. "You sure you're okay? You look like you could use a break." The cop smiled slightly, a rare moment of vulnerability. "Yeah, I think I will. Just not right now." His eyes drifted back to the alley where it all started. The bikes were gone. The leader, now locked up, would have plenty of time to reflect on his choices. But the cop wasn't thinking about the gang anymore. He was thinking about what came next. What would happen once the city moved on from this incident? What would his life look like now? The familiar feeling of uncertainty crept back into his chest. He knew that the end of this chapter didn't mean the end of his fight. There would always be something else to face, another challenge to overcome. But for now, as he watched the officers finish their work, he allowed himself a moment of quiet relief. He had taken down a dangerous gang. He had proven that it wasn't just about strength in numbers or intimidation. It was about doing what was right no matter what. It was about standing up to those who thought they could dominate, who believed they were invincible. And in that moment, as the last of the bikers disappeared into the police cars, the cop realized that he wasn't just a man in disguise anymore. He was a symbol of justice, someone who wasn't afraid to stand up and fight for what was right.